All right. Today we have Nate from Executive Fit LLC. Nate, thank you so much for hopping on. Would you mind just starting off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Well, first, thanks for having me on, Jake. This is really cool.
Okay.
So a little bit about me. My entrance kind of into like the fitness world was just after high school. Up until that point, I had really no interest in fitness or weightlifting pretty much at all. I joined the Army National Guard out of high school, and that's kind of what opened my eyes to the fitness world and the fact that, you know, it's obviously very important for our military to be physically fit. And so that's kind of how I started to get into it. Some of the guys that I was training with were weightlifters, had been weightlifters, and kind of introduced me into that world. And I realized that I had a passion for it. It was just something that was challenging, obviously. It's not easy. The bar doesn't lie, so and so that's kind of how I got into it. Coming back from basic training, decided I wanted to learn as much as I could. So I started working towards my NASM personal trainer certification, decided that that's what I wanted to do with my life. And so in addition to learning about fitness and weightlifting for myself, I wanted to help other people get in shape and do that sort of thing. So that's kind of, it was really right after high school for me that got me into the whole fitness thing.
Awesome. Well, you were a personal trainer then for how long did you do that?
It was 4 or 5 years that I was personal training. Towards the end of that, it really started to peter off to just a handful of clients before I finally left and decided that it just wasn't for me. Although my passion for fitness was still there and is still there, I had to go through that process of being a personal trainer and working with clients and dealing with clients and dealing with people one-on-one, face-to-face, to really decide that this is not the life for me.
Mm-hmm.
Which was a very interesting experience because I'm so passionate about fitness. It's a lifestyle for me, obviously. And it was very eye-opening to realize that the personal training side of things and teaching people and training people, there's no passion there, but there is a passion just to maintain my fitness, get strong, stay strong, for myself. It was an interesting aspect of growth to kind of be able to understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. It's an important part of my life, but I wouldn't ever want to train people. So yeah, sounds like you just got to learn. Yep. So when did you actually start Executive Fit then? Was it while you were a personal trainer or was it after? Could you just tell the birth story of it?
Absolutely. So it was towards the end of personal training when I decided to start Executive Fit. And what kind of got me into it was I wanted a platform for myself. I was training clients out of a home gym, really getting big into deadlifting at that point, and I wanted my own platform. Every company that I reached out to was either too big to deal with the little guy who just wants one unit, or they just wanted so much money for it. I couldn't afford it, and just figured, well, I really have no recourse here because those are my two options: is try to be the guy that's knocking on the door to a company that doesn't care and doesn't want to deal with me, or pay more than what I wanted to. So I just decided I'll make one for myself. And that first platform, there's plenty of tutorials on YouTube, how to make a platform. So I got on there and looked at that and just kind of rolled with it. Used some tape and a stencil to do the very first Punisher Skull platform. And then after seeing how much I was able to do and kind of what I was able to do with the cost of materials, I kind of decided, well, let me put it out there and see. I really enjoyed the entire process of gathering materials and building this thing. So let me put it out there and see if other people would be interested, because I can't be the only one, who was kind of wanted a platform but didn't want to just pay these prices that these companies were asking for. And that was really the start of it. I started putting it out there on Facebook Marketplace, just standard 4x8 units. And I was so busy just from Facebook Marketplace that I had to start telling clients, I can't keep continuing to train you, which was easy because that was at the same time I was starting to realize that maybe this personal training thing isn't for me. So I started letting go of clients that I didn't really want to train anymore so that I could focus more time on building, creating platforms. And that was, little to my knowledge, that was the beginning of it. It was just kind of a side hustle at that point.
And what year was this?
So this was right before COVID hit. I guess it would be 2019. It was about 2019 when this all started. And I was still working. Personal training was actually a side hustle. And I was working a 9-to-5 in the automotive refinishing industry. So it was like I had my main job, I had my personal training side hustle, and now I had this like side hustle of platforms. And as that continued to grow, I had to cut into the side hustle of personal training. So it was interesting.
That's got to be a tough position too. Like you're working a 9-to-5, you're doing a side hustle, which probably when you start, you're like, oh, I'm going to work my way into this. And then like down the road, you're like, ooh, I don't know if this is it. That had to have been frustrating, but you kind of just figure it out as you go. If you start something, it usually morphs into something that you do eventually love. So yeah, kudos to just like starting something, knowing like you want it to be in this world. So that's pretty cool. I'd be curious to hear, when did you actually make that jump to like, or when you said, no, I'm done personal training. I'm only going to do platforms, and then it eventually evolves, but I'm only going to do platforms for now. Was that like 2020 or was that 20? Yeah.
So it was towards the end of 2020.
Okay.
We were actually in the process of moving. So I was doing this all out of a single car garage, building platforms, training clients, all in a single car garage. It was total chaos. And we were in the process of moving to a bigger house. The family was growing. At the time we had 2 kids and 1 on the way. Now we have 4 kids. So we knew like we're going to outgrow this house. We need to get to a bigger place. So it kind of worked out perfectly because right when we were moving, I was thinking about running through that in my head of letting clients go and doing platforms full time. And we're doing platforms as my side hustle. And so taking that into account, sitting down with my wife and talking, it's like, all right, so we need a bigger house with bigger living space, but let's also look for something that has a shop, a bigger garage attached to it, or a shop on the property, so that I can kind of use this move as a transition into platforms full time. So up until we moved in 2020, I was still seeing clients. Then finally I used that move to a new town, new home, kind of as the cutoff to, all right, no more clients, just platforms. So that was kind of how that transition went.
You don't have to answer this, I guess you should say, if you don't feel comfortable, but can you say like in that first year, how many platforms you sold? Do you have an idea?
I probably was doing 1 a month, maybe one, maybe 2 a month. And because it was a side hustle, there was probably a good stretch of time where nothing would happen, no customers, no business, whatever. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of like, oh, whatever, like this is kind of just for fun at this point. I don't really expect it to be a full-time business. And I didn't think there was a big enough market for it, honestly, because all of the other companies that did do platforms did other things as well. They made other sorts of fitness equipment, whether it be racks or machines or whatever. So I just kind of looked at that and went, I don't think there's enough of a demand for this. And so, yeah, at the beginning, it was maybe one platform a month. And there was no advertising. And that first year, I didn't even think I put anything on Instagram. It was strictly all just like Facebook Marketplace. And, obviously we've scaled from there, but yeah, it was cool to see.
Got it. And did you start off just like creating platforms, selling them on the marketplace? And then where did the custom aspect come into it? We'd love to hear that.
It was actually all custom from the get-go.
Okay.
I never had the space to like stock material and stock platforms. So I just kind of took the mindset of, I'm going to make this, I'm going to share this product that I made and put out there that I can customize it for you and whatever you want on it. And my first big customer was Gold's Gym in Bridgewater, New Jersey. And the way that we handled it with that one, it was essentially, I want the Gold's Gym logo, and didn't really consider any like trademark infringement because it was going in a Gold's Gym, so didn't really worry about that. Got a big vinyl decal printed, nice polyurethane coating on the wood over top of the decal, and built it and went from there. So yeah, it was never really, I have this one in stock I could sell you. It was all from the get-go was custom. It's all going to be personalized for you. Whatever logo you want on it, we'll make it happen.
Gotcha. And then how did your company then evolve then? It's been a year and a half or so since you've gone full time. How has it changed since then?
Yeah. Well, like I said, with that first platform, we just had a vinyl decal printed, applied it to the wood, and rolled with it. And that's kind of how we started. And right from the get-go, I looked at that and went, okay, this is exactly how every other company is doing it. I don't want to do what every other company is doing. So from there, the evolution was, well, let's do this in a way that the logo can't come up, right? Because that was a common problem that we had seen in public gyms, that eventually over time a vinyl decal is going to start to peel up. It gets dirt under the edge, and all of a sudden 6 months down the road, like, it's halfway gone. So I started actually painting logos on the wood. I'd get a big printout of somebody's logo, use some transfer paper, transfer the logo onto the wood, tape it up, cut it out, spray paint it, and it was done. Eventually looked at that process and went, okay, this looks exactly like a decal, but it's not, but it still kind of looks the same because it's just paint. How can we do one better? I started researching into wood burning, laser engraving, and considered like just laser engraving logos into the wood. And going down that rabbit hole, I found the world of CNC, computer numerized control, which is essentially, if you've ever used a hand router, it's essentially a big computerized router machine. You can engrave wood, you can cut out pockets, you can cut out shapes and whatever. And so I discovered that and decided this is the direction I want to go. So I saved up a little bit of money and bought my first starter CNC machine. It was the biggest one that I could afford, which was about 30 inches wide or so. So I started engraving logos into the wood. And then after engraving it, I would paint them and then do a polyurethane coating and call it done. And then as the requests started to get more and more intricate, I realized that just engraving and painting, doing a very shallow engraving and painting it wasn't going to work with the intricacies of, so-and-so's logo. So then that kind of made me go down the rabbit hole of how could I carve out a deep pocket and then somehow fill it with a color of some sort. I eventually stumbled across epoxy resin and was seeing all of these like river tables and all this cool live edge woodworking stuff with epoxy resin, and was like, I could use that. So started carving into the wood into deeper pockets, taking this epoxy resin and then filling those deeper pockets so that we could do this color, that color, and the other color. And it was still at that point just painting and filling with clear resin. That evolved then into, what if we put some type of color in the resin? So it's not just a clear resin. That opened the world to mica powders and this rainbow of different types of colors with metallics and flat colors. And so the evolution started, started from laser engraving all the way down to recreating logos with epoxy. And so that's kind of what I landed on, was nobody's doing this. It's really, really cool. It looks way cooler than a vinyl decal, super vibrant colors. This is how I want to do logos. And so from there, it just took off. More and more, I started to get requests, was still using this beginner CNC machine. And the way that we had to do them in the beginning was, obviously, if you had a a 42-inch wide insert or 43-inch wide insert, which is pretty standard. I'd have to cut the sides off of the insert, put the center of it in, do the epoxy work, do the CNC and epoxy work, and then somehow reattach those side pieces so you had your full 43-inch wide insert. That got annoying really quick, especially as business started to grow. So I started looking into how can I get a bigger machine? How can I upgrade this machine to make it bigger, or how can I get a bigger machine? Business was doing really good. I eventually started to work part-time at my day job, at my 9-to-5 job, so that I could focus more time on this. I was spending so much time cutting down inserts and then reattaching the side pieces to them. And I was like, this is too much. Something's got to give. So did some research into the CNC world, found a couple companies that I was interested in, found another veteran who was local to me who had a big 4-foot by 8-foot German-made machine, and started talking to him about it. Come to find out, he was a rep for the company, and he hooked me up with the salesperson, and it was a big leap forward. It was a big step forward in terms of like investment. I had never made a significant investment in the business, but I just kind of figured that owning this machine in itself, whether it's used to make platforms or to make whatever, could be profitable, just in the sense that I don't have to only do platforms. I can do this, that, and the other thing with it. So I stepped out of the boat, made this big financial investment, financed a majority of it, and just kind of was like, we're doing this. It had already been at least a year at that point. And so I just kind of decided, let's make the jump, let's try it and see what happens. And I mean, the rest is history.
Cool. Well, what all do you sell right now then?
So we do a lot. The main one obviously is platforms. And by doing the epoxy work and the platforms, that kind of evolved to, we could make like plaques. Because this epoxy stuff is really cool. So we could do like plaques and signs and stuff. And so that evolved into epoxy signs. The signs evolved into just layered and painted signs, wood carved signs. And then with the capabilities of the machine, that kind of evolved into, we could do rack headers. So that's something that we just came out with, is replacement headers for the Rep PR 5000, replacement headers for the Rogue Monster rack. Hey, we could make barbell storage arms. I had a customer who had the Kabuki Trinity bars, the Kabuki trap bar, the transformer bar, and the Cadillac bench bar. And he came to me and was like, I can't store these. I need your help. So we worked together to kind of figure out this specific rack that's only for those bars, which is the Kabuki Trinity rack that is now a product that we make and sell. Standard barbell storage racks that with customizable plaques in the center, and all the center plaques are epoxy inlaid, and so just kind of unique storage pieces as well. And then a new product that we're coming out with that hasn't made it to the website yet is a insert for squat racks that compensate the slope of the garage. So I've had a bunch of people telling me, like, I stopped squatting in the garage. One guy was saying he developed a sore left trap because the way that, his gym is set up in his garage, he's basically standing and squatting like this. And he was like, I just gave up squatting after so many years because I developed all these muscle imbalances and this pain in one trap and not the other. And so he was like, this would be a perfect product for me. And so that's kind of the design of that product, is something where you can just put inside your squat rack when you're squatting, do your squatting, and then just take it out, lean up against the wall, and it's out of the way.
Awesome. Have you thought about that for the deadlift platform too?
Yeah, so with the deadlift platform, there's a bunch of tutorials on YouTube to how to level a platform.
Gotcha.
And one of those ways, I call it like the staircase method, which is basically taking 1/4-inch plywood and layering it in a reverse staircase. So it's thicker on the low end, thinner on the high end, and it, as it goes across the length, tapers down to thinner and thinner. So that's kind of a way that
Got it.
level a platform. Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. Cool. Well, that's a pretty large lineup. I'd be curious to hear what a day in the life looks like for you.
A day in the life, the alarm goes off at 4:45 in the morning now, and it's go until 5 o'clock. Dinner with the family. Typically, as of late, our routine, me and my wife's routine, has been cold plunge workout, dinner, and then after dinner, I try and disconnect. That's been something that's hard for me as a business owner, is being done and clocking out, because there never really is a time clock. You're always on. And so that's been a challenge for me lately, is separation, so that I can focus on the family. Because at the end of the day, that's kind of the entire reason I set out for this, on this whole business owner, executive fit journey, was so that I could give my kids the life that I didn't have. And so that's very important to me. So at the end of the day, it's clock out and spend time with the family. And then after the kids go to bed, it's usually sit down, do some computer work, or get back out in the shop. But typically that 4:30 or 4:45 to 5 p.m. looks like typical operations, running the machine, doing epoxy inlays, packing up boxes. My wife has been a big help in like the shipping department side of things with packaging everything up. Because we do such a large variety of products, I don't buy boxes for products. We make boxes. So like everything is custom made, literally even down to what your product ships out in, was made on that machine behind me. We figured out 6 months ago or so that it's more cost efficient to buy sheet goods of cardboard and just cut our own boxes. We had plenty of shipping issues from just using like standard boxes you could buy and stuff just getting damaged in shipment, that we were like, something's got to give. And, we figured out a way to be able to package stuff nice, tight, neat. And since doing that, that in itself has been game changer. We very rarely have shipping issues now because of it. But yeah, it's very, very high paced, very fast paced days for me.
Yeah, sounds like it. How long for like a deadlift platform, how long does it typically take you to make?
So depending on the logo, if you've got 7, 8, 10, sometimes 15 different colors or different layers involved in the logo, it can take 15 days, 30 days.
Oh, wow.
Just because each color, you have to do one color at a time with epoxy, and you need to give it at least 16 hours of cure time before you can cut back into it to do another color. But if we're talking like a single or 2 or 3 color logo, I mean, that's something that can be knocked out in a week. Right now we typically stay scheduled out 6 to 8 weeks for production. And I also like to tell people that, just so that when in 4 weeks we're ready to ship, it's a nice surprise. I'd rather give customers a nice surprise of, hey, we're early, than like, oh, we're 4 or 5 weeks late. So.
Gotcha. So who are your typical customers?
It is a good split between residential homes and businesses, but I would say it probably leans a little bit heavier on the business, business to business sales. And mainly on the business to business sale, I would say like small boutique studios as well as big corporate gyms. And I think it's more split that way, because typically if you are a trainer or you own a facility, you have space to dedicate to a big platform. When you are just somebody who has a home gym, and maybe let's say you're building a home gym on a budget, or the gym was not the forethought in buying the house, maybe you only have 1-car garage or a 2-car garage, and space is limited. A lot of people have to use that same garage they have for the gym for the kids' toys and yard tools and other storage, just general house storage stuff. So you may not necessarily have all of the space to dedicate to this permanent platform that doesn't move. And so I think that's a big reason as to why we typically do more sales on the business side, more business to business sales.
That makes sense. That's typical. That was my experience with like a deadlift platform, and I think a lot of other people's. But cool to hear. Well, what about some of your favorite projects? And would you say that, actually, I had a follow-up question. What would you say the differences in like the requests would be for a commercial gym or just a gym versus someone's home gym?
Typically, I would say the difference in requests have been as of late, which is why we came out with this product. But can you build this so that I can move it out of the way when I'm done with it? Mm-hmm. And I had enough of those requests that I was like, we need to come out with a product that can be moved off to the side when somebody's done using it. That's the biggest difference in requests. A lot of people who are really into fitness might have their own logo for their home gym. So that's another thing. I typically help residential customers figure out their logo versus businesses are like, this is my logo and this is what I want. So those are probably the two biggest differences in requests, the logo and what's actually going on the platform. And on the residential side, the ability to fold it up and move it out of the way, or just build it in a way that it's 3 pieces and I can get it out when I want it and put it away when I don't want it.
Yep, that makes sense. That's what I would want. I would probably still like leave it up for a few days at a time, but it would be nice to know that I could fold it up and move if absolutely necessary. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So you mentioned at the beginning, you started off pretty basic, and then you've also like improved machinery and tools and et cetera. But what would you say you have improved at the most?
That's a good one. This is something that I didn't anticipate going into this skill that I needed, which is essentially vector design. And then on top of vector design, manipulating vector logos in a way that works for doing epoxy inlays. So essentially, for those who don't know what a vector is, think of like a regular logo, but instead of all of the shapes being different colors of the logo, each color is just a regular line, right? And so without getting into the nitty-gritty of it, basically there's a methodology to manipulating that vector design so that when you cut this color of epoxy and then you fill that color and then cut this color of epoxy, there is no space in between them. I'm simplifying this, and it's kind of a weird thing to try to simplify. I don't think I've ever thought about it this way, but that's like vector design and taking somebody's image and not really converting it, but tracing it manually so that I can then take what I've traced and use the machine to cut that pocket out to be able to fill it with epoxy is not something that I expected. And then going out on a larger scale of doing big size logos, a common thing that you see in like the cutting board woodworking world with epoxy inlays is the final thing that you do is you flatten it. And essentially that's taking a big, large bit and going across it to cut off all of the extra epoxy that spilled over the edge. And you can't do that with the plywood that we use for the center inserts. So I had to then figure out, well, if I can't flatten it, I have to figure out a way to essentially bring back those sharp lines of what the logo is supposed to look like after all of the different colors have been cut. So it's definitely been a challenge, and there's not many resources out there to learn that kind of thing. Not because nobody's doing epoxy inlays, but nobody's teaching really good methodologies about doing epoxy inlays. So learning something that there is no resources out there for has been very, very fun, very stressful at times, but very rewarding for sure. Yeah.
I was curious as well. You mentioned like you like stumbled across the like earlier the like method of like cutting the board slightly, and then the research into the epoxy. I'm curious, like how long did that take? Where was it like you watched a few videos or you were good to go? Or was it like you had to like research for like 20 hours, put some things together, and then also like test it out? I'd be curious to hear just like about that process and how long it took.
Yeah. It was probably over the course of a month.
Yeah.
From the time that I had discovered CNC and decided I don't want to just paint stuff. I don't want to just carve and paint stuff. I want to, evolve into the colored epoxy resin. And at first, when it was introduced to me, I rejected it. And I was like, nah, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to do that. And then in my own research, kind of came back to it and was like, this could be feasible. And then it was just like that, a couple small test pieces to kind of figure out how it would work. And then just in my own head, like kind of war game and figure out how do we scale that to a larger size for like a platform per se. And in theory, it worked. And in the beginning, I would always tell customers, hey, I'm going to try and do this as an epoxy inlay. It's going to look really cool. But if I can't do it, I'm just going to eat it and buy a decal. And so my whole process was, I have this way out if this cool idea doesn't work. I can still get the customer, like at the end of the day, what they wanted, a platform with their logo on it. It just may not be this way of the epoxy inlay. And that mindset that I've always had is kind of what led me into doing some of my favorite jobs. There was one in particular I'll remember. It's the first super intricate design. I'm not a Dragon Ball Z fan, but it was this character from Dragon Ball Z, Goshi maybe, I don't know, and
Goku, I don't know, yeah,
but maybe Goku, I don't know. So the customer sends it to me, and he's like, I really want this on a platform, and I'm looking at all of the different layers. There's like 2 different color greens. I have to match a skin tone. I was just like totally baffled by it, and like I just stared at it for probably 2 hours total before I knew how I was going to attack it. And I told him, I remember this conversation. I was like, listen, I'm going to try and do this as an epoxy inlay. Worst comes to worst, it'll be a decal. But if I can pull this off, it's going to be so freaking cool. Mm-hmm. And he was like, yeah, that's fine. It's totally good. And it was the very first super intricate logo that I had ever done. And that one, and then every single one that I look at and go, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this, are my favorite ones. Just because when my first thought is looking at a logo is, I don't know about this one, and it turns out really good, those are my favorite.
Awesome. That's really cool. And you mentioned the deadlift platform is still the most popular product. What else would you say are people buying?
Definitely the rack headers.
Yeah.
They seem to be pretty popular. I don't know of any company or anyone that's out there that's doing that. I'm sure Rogue would customize a header for you if you were to buy a rack from them. I don't know what they would charge for it. I don't know about Rep though. I don't know if they would do that. But so that seems to be a pretty popular product. Those two really, I mean, the barbell storage is popular, but I mean, by far the platforms are the most popular product that I sell.
Cool. And then earlier we were chatting about, or you were telling the origin story, and you were saying like you were just trying to solve your own need with the deadlift platform, doing some research, and was like, why is no one doing this? Or, I mean, I honestly was thinking the same thing. It was probably 4 or 5 years ago when I wanted a deadlift platform, and I did some research, and I was like, oh, I'm not a DIY guy. I don't really want to do that and probably mess up a lot before I finally before I probably put together an average looking platform. And I also don't have the patience. So kudos to you for all, like you mentioned, all of those intricate details. I'm sure a lot of patience goes into that. But yeah, it was like you have to like basically DIY or overpay for even a Titan one is not cheap. The Rogue ones were really expensive. Surely there were some other, like if you really wanted a custom one, you'd probably have to, I don't even know. But yeah, no one was doing it. Why do you think that was the case?
I honestly have no idea. I think it's easy to fall into that trap of there's no market for this, just because I think we as humans think about, like, we think about ourselves in a way. And what I mean by that is like, well, there's no market for this because I'm how old, and one time in my life I've thought about buying a platform. So like, sure, extrapolate that over everybody in the United States or everybody in the world, but I've only thought about it once, or I've only bought one platform. There's no market. There's no way there's a market for it. And what I've learned is that there is, honestly. And even in other things, like my neighbor across the street does epoxy floors, like concrete coatings. Never once in my life have I thought about doing an epoxy floor, but the dude's got a business big enough to support 3 or 4 families, you know? And so I think that we can get caught into that trap very easily of, there's no market for it, or not a big enough market for it. I think that might be the reason nobody's doing it. I think the other reason that nobody's doing it, or might be a deterrent for people, is simply shipping.
Yes.
That was one of the biggest hurdles to overcome, was how the hell do you ship an 8x8 platform reasonably? You know, I mean, and in the beginning, the thought crossed my mind of, why don't we just ship them complete? And then after building some, it was like, this isn't reasonable. You can't do that. And so then, you know, going through the process of figuring out how to ship these things, that was probably where I learned some of my biggest lessons in the business. And so I think that could be a deterrent too. You know, sure, shipping, you can ship a package. That's pretty self-explanatory, and anybody who's got somewhat of common sense can figure it out. But shipping stuff via freight, that's not very common. I didn't know anybody in an industry that was shipping via freight, so I had nobody in my phone contacts that I could turn to ask for advice about in the very beginning. So that can definitely be a huge detractor, I think, and a huge hurdle, is just something as simple as shipping. How do you do it?
Right. And how do you ship it?
So everything is essentially cut down to fit on a pallet. So that kind of leads into you know, my most popular product is the 4x8 platform with a custom cut rack extension. And typically some racks are deeper than others. Let's just say the last one we did was about 6 foot. So what I'll try to do is cut everything down to be the same size or smaller as the rack extension. Okay. So that when everything goes on a pallet, everything can just go on a pallet, right? We build a wall around it and build it up on a pallet and whatever, and design it in a way so that when it goes back together, it's not separating at any seams. So that's kind of a downside to shipping via freight, is you're going to have some seams here, you know, you're going to have a seam there, especially on like real big size platforms. That's definitely a downside. But then we just kind of figured out, how do we put these platforms together in a way that the seam doesn't go all the way through? You know, there's a seam here on the top layer, but the seam on the next layer is down here, so that when everything's screwed together, it holds itself together nice and tight. We had experimented with shipping 4 foot by 8 foot pallets. That's a nightmare.
Yes,
and it gets expensive, especially when we're talking about just one unit. The more floor space you take up on a truck, the more they charge you. And if you're not going vertically with your pallet, it gets expensive.
Yes. Yeah.
It gets expensive because that's all calculated by cubic density, and I don't know how it gets calculated. I use a special calculator for it. But yeah, so everything essentially gets cut down so it can fit on a pallet and then assembled in a way that we don't have any separation at seams.
Makes sense. Cool. Well, what is what are your upcoming goals? I'd be, or I guess not goals, but like I'd be curious to hear what are your next steps? Are you like looking to like hire somebody, or yeah? So what's next for you?
So next, in terms of long term, my goal is to build something similar to Rogue in the sense that we don't outsource anything. Everything is done here in the United States, whether we use vendors in the States or we invest in equipment and do it ourselves. And then I want to build a team behind this. I want to build a kind of like a culture behind this. It's more than just a company that makes this products. I want to create a family. I want to be able to support not only my family, but I want to support the people who end up working for me's family. You know, I want to build something that is kind of putting back into the local community and then the community as a whole being the United States. We try very hard not to import stuff from China. Pretty much everything is bought and manufactured here in the United States. So that's kind of my long-term vision, is building this USA-made company that supports more than just me and my family. Short-term, I think.
I was gonna ask, is that with like selling racks and selling plates, et cetera, or is that like, so do you want to be able to outfit full gyms?
Definitely a possibility. Not really something that's on the plate just yet.
Right.
It's not something that I haven't thought about. So keeping that, you know, that USA view, that kind of like America First view in my back pocket of how I want this, how I'm envisioning this to be in 5-10 years, kind of helps to dictate what choices we make now for these short-term steps moving forward. Definitely hiring somebody, you know, is kind of like going to be the first step. And for me, that's figuring out what aspect of the entire process do I want to let go of. I really enjoy every aspect of the process from start to finish, from figuring out what the customer wants, how we can help the customer solve that problem, to packing up a pallet. You know, I enjoy every part of it. And so for me, it's going to be figuring out what part of that do I want to let go and finding somebody who I can train to do that. And then as we continue to grow, taking that same mindset. All right, we've got this aspect. I got Joe Schmo doing this here. You know, what is the next area I want to let go of and train somebody or train people to do? And so that's kind of my view for this year and next year is what area do I want to let go of and train somebody to handle?
Got it. That's hard. But it sounds like you really love your job, and all of that sounds really cool. I don't have any other questions for you. Anything else you want to chat about?
Well, I just want to thank you again for having me on the podcast. I've been following Garage Gym Experiment. I mean, you're a name, you know, a big name. And so I really appreciate everything, all of the content that you guys put out. I think it's extremely helpful, especially for people who are just getting into it, or like, especially, you know, with COVID, how COVID impacted home gyms and how so many people started building home gyms. I mean, your resources are incredible for people. And I think that's awesome.
Well, I appreciate it. And it's been cool because I feel like Garage Gym Experiment shared one of your very first photos, and then, you know, every so often since. So it's really cool to see like how you have grown over the past 3-4 years now. And, you know, I don't necessarily think I definitely, when I was doing the deadlift platform research, I definitely remember thinking someone needs to do this. I don't know if it would be make someone make for a good living. I think probably because I was thinking about shipping issues, being just such a tough thing to handle. But it's really cool to see that you're doing it and it looks like you're growing, you're busy, and you've got a lot of good future goals. So really cool to chat with you as well. But anyways, we'll make sure to plug in those links on the description of the podcast or on YouTube, and I'll see you at Home Gym Con.
Awesome. I'm excited for that.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's going to do it.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake.